June 4, 1944. 11:47 a.m. 800 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. The fog sits on the Atlantic like a wool blanket soaked in salt water. You can't see 30 feet in any direction. Perfect. Kapitanleutnant Harald Lange stands on the conning tower of U-505, leather jacket slick with condensation, binoculars useless in his hands. The Type IXC submarine cuts through the gray soup at 8 knots, diesel engines rumbling beneath his boots. He's done this 100 times before. More than 100. For 3 years, fog has been his ally, his shield, his invitation to hunt. The lookouts scan the horizon out of habit, but nobody expects to see anything. That's the whole point. Lange checks his watch. Another 2 hours on the surface to charge batteries, then back down into the cold dark where U-boats belong. He's thinking about the convoy routes, about the intelligence briefing in Loria 3 weeks ago, about the 23 merchant ships his crew has sent to the bottom since 1941. He's thinking about everything except the one thing he should be thinking about. He has no idea he's already been found. Below deck, the crew moves through their routines with the practiced efficiency of men who've learned to live in a steel tube. Machinist's mate Gottfried Fischer wipes oil from his hands and lights a cigarette in the engine room, the forbidden luxury of surface running. In the radio compartment, Funkmat Klaus Weber monitors frequencies that have gone eerily quiet over the past 6 months. Fewer U-boats reporting in. Fewer voices crackling through the static each week. The Kriegsmarine calls it bad luck. Increased Allied patrols. The fortunes of war. The crew of U-505 doesn't know the real reason yet. Lange lowers his binoculars and allows himself a thin smile. 3 years of war and the fog still works. The Americans have their aircraft, their escort carriers, their endless swarms of destroyers, but none of it matters when visibility drops to 0. A U-boat on the surface in fog is a ghost. Invisible. Untouchable. He believes this completely. In exactly 4 minutes, he's going to learn how wrong he is. The sound comes first. Not the throb of distant propellers that U-boat men know like their own heartbeat, but something closer. Much closer. A destroyer's screws, thrashing water at flank speed, and they're getting louder by the second. Lange spins, binoculars up, seeing nothing but gray. His mind races through possibilities. They couldn't have been spotted. It's impossible. Unless someone got careless with a smoke plume, unless the exhaust. Alarm. The lookout scream cuts through the fog. Lange doesn't even see what the man is pointing at before he's shouting the order that's kept him alive through 42 combat patrols. Dive. Dive. All hands below. The klaxon shrieks. Men throw themselves through hatches. The bridge clears in seconds, bodies tumbling down the ladder, practiced panic, controlled chaos. Lange takes one last look, and that's when the fog parts just enough. A bow wave. Massive. Close enough to see the white water curling. Then the ship itself. American destroyer, Buckley class, charging out of the fog bank like a steel nightmare. She's so close Lange can see sailors on deck. So close he can read the whole number. D-24. USS Chatelain. And mounted on her mast, rotating slowly, is something Lange has never seen before on an American warship. A rectangular antenna, sweeping back and forth, searching. Searching. His blood turns to ice water. Lange drops through the hatch and yanks it shut as U-505's bow planes bite into the ocean. The submarine tilts forward, beginning the crash dive that should save them. The crew is already at battle stations, faces pale in the red emergency lighting, waiting for the depth charges they all know are coming. In the control room, Chief Engineer Joseph Hauser calls out depths. 20 meters. 25. 30. Too slow. They're diving too slow. Lange grips the periscope housing and counts seconds in his head. At this range, a good destroyer crew needs 30 seconds to get firing solutions. He's counting on 45. He's counting on the fog, on confusion, on the same invisibility that's protected him for 3 years. He gets 17 seconds. The first depth charge detonates so close to the hull that every man aboard feels it in his teeth. The lights flicker. Cork insulation rains from the ceiling. A gauge shatters, spraying glass across the navigation table. Then the second one hits. Closer. The submarine shudders like a kicked dog. Men grab onto anything bolted down. In the engine room, Fisher watches a cracked spider across a main bearing housing and knows with absolute certainty that they're about to die. The third depth charge explodes directly above them. The pressure hull screams. It's a sound no submariner ever wants to hear, metal groaning under stress it was never designed to take, rivets popping like gunshots, welds flexing and crying out. U-505 is 300 tons of steel being squeezed in a giant's fist, and that fist is tightening. 80 meters, Hauser's voice cracks. 90. We're losing trim. Water sprays from a dozen new leaks. Not gushing yet, but the mist fills the compartments with salt fog, choking men who are already struggling to breathe. The air tastes like copper and fear. Lange clings to the periscope stand, forcing his voice steady. Level off at 100. Rig for silent running. The crew obeys because that's what they've been trained to do, but everyone in the control room knows the truth. Silent running won't save them. Not this time. That American destroyer knew exactly where they were before they even started diving. The depth charges aren't random. They're surgical. Above them, USS Chatelain's sonar operator sits in front of his scope, headphones clamped over his ears, watching a bright green blip that represents U-505. The contact is perfect. Crystal clear. He calls out bearings to the bridge and aboard, professional monotone, like he's reading a grocery list. Contact bearing 270, range 400 yards, depth 100 feet. On Chatelain's fantail, sailors roll another pattern of depth charges into the racks. 8 Mark 9s, each one packed with 200 pounds of torpex. They set the detonators for 100 feet and wait for the command. It comes 30 seconds later. The charges tumble off the stern in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, black drums spiraling down through green water, sinking fast. The destroyer peels away, already gaining distance before her own weapons detonate. Inside U-505, they hear the splashes. For distinct impacts on the surface, far too close together, far too accurate. Brace for. The ocean erupts. For explosions, so close together they feel like one continuous earthquake. The submarine rolls 30 degrees to starboard. Men fly across compartments, slamming into bulkheads, into machinery, into each other. The emergency lighting dies completely. For 5 seconds, U-505 is a tumbling coffin in absolute darkness, and in that darkness every man sees his own death. Then the backup lights flicker on, dim and red, painting everything in blood. Hauser pulls himself off the deck, blood streaming from his nose. Damage report. The reports come in fragments, shouted through voice tubes and speaking tubes, panic barely controlled. Engine room taking water, port side. Hydraulics failure on the dive planes. Electrical fire in the battery compartment. Fisher, down in the engine room, stares at the water rising around his ankles and knows they're finished. The main motor is still running, but the port propeller shaft is vibrating so badly he can see it through the bearing housing. Another depth charge hit like that and the shaft will tear itself apart, flooding the entire stern in seconds. In the control room, Lange makes the calculation every U-boat commander dreads. Stay down and drown slowly as systems fail one by one, or surface and take their chances with the destroyer's deck guns. It's not really a choice. Blow all tanks. Emergency surface. Hauser stares at him. Her Kowloon, they'll be waiting. I know what they'll be waiting with. Blow the tanks. The compressed air screams through the ballast system. U-505 claws toward the surface like a wounded animal, bow tilting up at a sharp angle, men scrambling to keep their footing. Water pours from ruptured pipes. Smoke from the electrical fire fills the forward compartments, acrid and choking. They break the surface in a fountain of white water and black diesel smoke. On USS Chatelain's bridge, Commander Daniel Gallery sees the submarine broach 400 yards off his port bow and allows himself a wolf's grin. He's been hunting U-boats for 18 months. This is his first kill. Or it will be, in about 60 seconds. All guns, open fire. The destroyer's 3-inch guns roar. The first shell screams past U-505's conning tower so close that Lange feels the displacement, a wall of hot air that nearly knocks him off his feet. He's emerged through the hatch onto a bridge that's already taking fire, already surrounded by geysers of white water from near misses. The submarine wallows in the swell, dead in the water, smoke pouring from hatches. Below, Fisher has abandoned the engine room, the flooding is too fast, the fire's too hot. Men are climbing the ladders, pushing past each other, some of them screaming, some of them silent with shock. A 3-inch shell punches through the base of the conning tower with a sound like a church bell being hit with a sledgehammer. It doesn't explode, it's armor-piercing, designed to penetrate and detonate inside the hull, but it ricochets off the inner pressure hull and exits through the starboard side, leaving 2 massive holes that immediately start taking water. Lange looks at the destroyer closing in, at the guns firing, at his submarine dying beneath his feet. He looks at his crew, faces appearing in the hatches, eyes wide and desperate. And then he looks at that rectangular antenna on Chatelain's mast, still rotating, still searching, even though they've already been found. He doesn't understand it yet. But he's starting to. "White flag," he says quietly. "Someone find me a white flag." Nobody has a white flag. Of course they don't. U-boat crews don't pack surrender equipment. They pack torpedoes and spare parts and tins of sardines that taste like metal and despair. Surrender isn't in the manual. Surrender is for surface ships with lifeboats and rafts and some slim hope of rescue. Submarines don't surrender. They sink. But U-505 isn't sinking fast enough, and USS Chatelain's guns are very much still firing. Oberleutnant Paul Meyer, the boat's first officer, rips his white undershirt off and waves it overhead like a man trying to flag down a taxi in a thunderstorm. It's absurd. It's humiliating. It saves their lives. On Chatelain's bridge, Commander Gallery sees the makeshift flag and raises his hand. "Cease fire. Cease fire." The guns fall silent. The sudden quiet is almost worse than the noise, you can hear everything now. Men shouting. Metal groaning. Water rushing into compartments below. The diesel engines coughing their last breath before dying completely. Lange stands on the tilting deck of his submarine and counts his crew as they emerge. 42 men made it to the surface. 59 were aboard when they dove. He doesn't let himself think about the 17 who didn't make it out of the engine room and battery compartment. Not yet. Later. Right now he needs to keep the living alive. The American destroyer circles like a shark, close enough now that Lange can see individual faces. Young faces. Boys, really, same as his crew. They man the rails with rifles and machine guns, covering the Germans with the casual efficiency of men who've done this before. Except they haven't. Gallery stands at the rail with binoculars, studying the submarine. It's low in the water, stern settling, but it's not sinking as fast as it should be. The conning tower is still 6 feet clear. The hull is intact except for the holes his 3-inch guns punched through the superstructure. And then Gallery has the thought that will change everything. What if we could capture it? No U-boat has been captured at sea since 1941. The Germans have standing orders to scuttle before surrender, open the seacocks, set demolition charges, send the boat and all its secrets to the bottom. German engineering doctrine assumes any submarine facing capture has at least 60 seconds to destroy itself. Gallery looks at his watch. U-505 has been on the surface for 90 seconds. Boarding party, he roars. I want a boarding party in the water now. On the submarine's deck, Lange hears the American commander shouting and feels ice form in his stomach. They're not just accepting surrender. They're coming aboard. He looks down at the open hatch. He thinks about the Enigma machine in the radio room. The code books. The acoustic torpedo manuals. The chart showing U-boat patrol routes and rendezvous points. Every single piece of intelligence that could get men killed. He gave the scuttle order. He's certain he gave it. Before surfacing, before blowing the tanks, he told Hauser to set the charges. Didn't he? The moment stretches. Lange tries to remember through the chaos and the explosions and the deafening noise of his submarine dying. Did Hauser acknowledge? Did anyone hear him over the alarms? A whaleboat hits the water from Chatelain's davits. 8 American sailors row toward U-505 with a speed that looks like panic, and in a way, it is. They have no idea if the Germans set scuttle charges. They have no idea if the submarine will drop out from under them in the next 30 seconds. They're rowing toward a boat that might become a coffin before they even get there. Lieutenant Albert David leads the boarding party. He's 23 years old, from Maryville, Missouri, and he has absolutely no training for what he's about to do. Nobody does. The U.S. Navy hasn't captured an enemy submarine in modern warfare. There's no manual. No protocol. David reaches the U-boat's hull and grabs onto the dive plane. The metal is slick with oil and seawater. He hauls himself up, legs dangling, and rolls onto the deck. Lange watches this American officer, this kid, climb aboard his submarine and feels the strangest sensation. Not anger. Not fear. Just a bone-deep exhaustion that makes him want to sit down on the deck and never get up. The boat is yours, he says in careful English. My men need water. David doesn't answer. He's already moving toward the conning tower hatch, the one still breathing smoke and steam. His boarding party follows, a sonar operator, 2 mechanics, a radioman. Men who might be able to make sense of what they find inside. They disappear into the submarine. For 15 seconds, nothing happens. Then David's voice echoes up from below, high-pitched with something between terror and excitement. She's still running. The pumps are still going. Jesus Christ, she's not sinking. On Chatelain's bridge, Gallery grabs the rail so hard his knuckles go white. The U-boat crew didn't scuttle. Either they forgot in the chaos, or the order never got through, or some miracle of incompetence saved the boat from destruction. Which means everything inside is intact. Everything. David emerges from the hatch 30 seconds later, arms full of papers. Code books. Recognition manuals. Charts with penciled routes and positions. He's grinning like a lunatic, like a man who just found buried treasure, because in a way, he has. Commander, he shouts across the water. You need to see this. But Gallery is already shouting orders to bring the towlines alongside. They're taking this submarine home. All of it. The hull, the machinery, the torpedoes, the entire bloody boat. They'll pump out the flooding, patch the holes, and tow it 2,500 miles to Bermuda if they have to. On U-505's deck, Lange watches his crew being transferred to the destroyer in groups of 10. Fisher goes across in the third group, still soaked in oil and seawater, still clutching his cigarettes even though they're too wet to light. Weber the radioman goes in the fifth group, his face blank with shock. Meyer leans close to Lange and whispers in German, "Did we scuttle?" Lange looks at the Americans swarming over his boat, disappearing into hatches, emerging with armfuls of documents. He looks at the submarine that's somehow, impossibly, still afloat. "No," he says. "I don't think we did." Meyer closes his eyes. God help us. Lange doesn't answer. He's watching that rectangular antenna on the destroyer's mast, still rotating, still searching for submarines that aren't there anymore. And he's starting to understand that the failure to scuttle isn't the worst thing that's happened today. The worst thing is that he still doesn't know how they were found. The Germans are separated immediately. Officers go to one compartment. Enlisted men to another. Standard procedure. Keep them isolated, keep them disoriented, get answers while they're still in shock. Commander Gallery knows he has maybe 6 hours before training kicks in and the prisoners remember they're not supposed to talk. He needs those 6 hours. Lange sits in a cramped officer's wardroom aboard USS Chatelain, still wearing his soaked leather jacket, still smelling like diesel fuel and burned insulation. 2 American officers sit across from him, a lieutenant commander with intelligence insignia and a younger officer taking notes. They've given him coffee. Real coffee, not the acorn substitute Germany's been brewing since 1942. It tastes like civilization. The intelligence officer's name is Trocino. He speaks German with a Bavarian accent, which means he's probably American-born, probably recruited for this exact job. He smiles like a man at a dinner party. Kapitanleutnant Lange. I need to understand your patrol route. I am required to give only my name, rank, and... Yes, yes. Geneva Convention. I've read it too. Trocino slides a photograph across the table. It's aerial reconnaissance, taken from high altitude, showing U-505 on the surface 3 days ago. Clear as daylight. We've been following you since you left Lorient. Lange stares at the photo. It's impossible. U-boats travel submerged during daylight, surface only at night to charge batteries. They couldn't have been photographed unless. You're wondering how we got this picture. Trocino isn't asking. You're wondering how we found you in fog with zero visibility. You're wondering why 3 of the last 5 boats from your flotilla never came home. Lange says nothing. His hands are shaking. He grips the coffee cup to make them stop. May I be direct? Trocino leans forward. Your U-boat tactics worked brilliantly in 1940. In 1941. Even in 1942, we were terrified of you. But it's 1944 now, and you're still hunting the same way. Same patrol routes. Same radio procedures. Same surfacing patterns. He pulls out another photograph. This one shows the conning tower of a different U-boat, taken at night, the image grainy but unmistakable. We can see you in the dark now. We can see you through fog. We can see you through clouds at 10,000 feet. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Lange's voice comes out hoarse. Radar. Centimetric radar. 10-centimeter wavelength. Your METOX receivers can't detect it because it's a completely different frequency band. When you surface to charge batteries, we paint you on our scopes from 6 miles away. When you snorkel, we track your head. When you're completely submerged, we use sonobuoys that listen for your propellers. The words land like depth charges. Each one detonating something Lange thought he understood about how this war worked. For how long? The Royal Navy's had it since late 1942. We've had it in force since early 1943. Trocino's smile is gone now. His voice is almost gentle. You've been visible for a year and a half. Lange thinks about Weber monitoring radio frequencies, reporting fewer voices each week. He thinks about the 42 U-boats lost in May alone. Not bad luck. Not increased patrols. Technology. The fog, Lange says. This morning. You found us in fog that you couldn't see through. I couldn't see through it. Trocino taps the photograph. Our radar could. You were a bright dot on the screen the entire time. Commander Gallery's sonar operator was calling out your bearing and range while you thought you were invisible. Lange sets down the coffee cup because he can't hold it anymore. His hands are shaking too badly. 3 years of war. 3 years of surfacing in fog banks and weather fronts, believing in the protection of reduced visibility. 3 years of being hunted by a weapon he didn't know existed. How many men died believing they were invisible? Your Enigma codes, Trocino continues, still in that gentle voice. We've been reading those too. Since 1941. Every position report, every rendezvous, every convoy coordinate. We know where you are before you get there. This is worse than capture. This is having the ground dissolve beneath you and realizing it was never solid to begin with. Everything Lange was taught, everything he believed about U-boat warfare, the entire doctrine that cost him friends and crewmates and sleeping nights, was based on assumptions that stopped being true years ago. Why are you telling me this? Lange's voice cracks. Why not just let us keep trying? Because the war is over. Trocino leans back. Germany just doesn't know it yet. In 6 months, maybe a year, Berlin will surrender. Your admiral will scuttle the U-boat fleet rather than let us capture them. And men like you, good commanders, experienced crews, will have died for nothing. He slides one more document across the table. It's a decoded German radio message, dated 2 weeks ago, ordering U-boat headquarters to relocate from Paris because Allied armies are closing in. We're winning, Trocino says quietly. Not because we're braver, or smarter, or better trained. We're winning because we can see you, and you can't see us. And there's nothing your courage or your skill can do to change that. Lange stares at the decoded message. At the proof that nothing was secret. Nothing was safe. He thinks about the 60,000 German submariners who've put to sea since 1939. He thinks about the 32,000 who never came home. He thinks about the rectangular antenna on the mast, rotating in the fog, seeing everything. My crew, he finally says. What happens to them? Prisoner of war camp. Probably in Virginia or Louisiana. They'll spend the rest of the war eating better food than they've had in years and working on farms for 50 cents a day. When Germany surrenders, they'll go home. And you, 505? Trocino's expression doesn't change, but something flickers behind his eyes. I'm not authorized to discuss that. Which means the Americans are going to take it apart. Study every system. Learn every secret. Use it to kill more submarines. Lange closes his eyes. The coffee has gone cold in his hands. I would like to see my men, he says. I would like to tell them what you've told me. We can arrange that. Trocino stands, gathering his papers. Kapitanleutnant, one more thing. Lieutenant David, the officer who boarded your boat, he was prepared to die doing that. He climbed aboard expecting scuttle charges to detonate at any moment. Just so you know what kind of men you're dealing with now. After Trocino leaves, Lange sits alone in the wardroom for a long time. Through the bulkhead, he can hear the sounds of USS Chatelain's crew at work. Efficient. Organized. Confident. The sounds of a navy that can see in the dark. 300 miles away, in the concrete bunker that serves as U-boat command headquarters in Lorient, France, Captain Zur C. Wolfgang Luth stares at a map of the Atlantic covered in pins. Each pin represents a submarine that hasn't reported in. There are a lot of pins. U-505's last transmission came in 48 hours ago. A routine position report, nothing unusual. Standard protocol is to maintain radio silence for 72 hours between broadcasts. Lange is following the rules. There's no reason to worry. Except Luth is worrying. He's been worrying since March, when 7 boats from the 2nd Flotilla sailed out and only 2 came back. He's been worrying since April, when U-515, commanded by his friend Werner Heinke, one of the best captains in the fleet, simply vanished mid-patrol with no distress call, no warning, no trace. He's been worrying since he started noticing patterns that shouldn't exist. Allied convoys that change course 3 hours before U-boat wolf packs arrive at the intercept point. Patrol aircraft that appear over empty ocean and drop depth charges on submarines that are supposedly invisible. Destroyers that find U-boats in weather conditions that should make detection impossible. Luth pulls out a folder marked Stranggeheim, top secret. Inside are after-action reports from the few commanders who've survived recent patrols. He reads through them again, even though he's memorized every word. U-231, destroyer appeared from fog bank at close range, immediate attack, no warning from METOX. U-648, surfaced at night in heavy seas, aircraft arrived within minutes, unable to detect with radar detector. U-377, Allied escort changed convoy route despite radio silence maintained throughout patrol. One report, from U-333's commander, includes a single line that Luth has underlined in red ink: "It is as if they can see us when we cannot see them." Luth closes the folder. He's come to a conclusion that he can't put in any official report, can't tell his superiors, can't even speak aloud. The conclusion is this: they've lost. Not the battle. The war. The entire technological race. While Germany was building better torpedoes and bigger submarines and more powerful diesel engines, the Allies were building something that made all of it irrelevant. They'd invented a way to see through darkness and weather and ocean itself. And worse, far worse, they'd done it quietly. There was no announcement. No intelligence warning. No captured equipment to study. The Allies simply started sinking U-boats at a rate that defied explanation, and the Kriegsmarine kept sending more boats out because that's what militaries do. They keep fighting even when the mathematics say they can't win. Luth looks at the map again. At all those pins. Each one represents 50 men. 50 men who believe that fog is still an ally. That night still offers protection. That radio silence still means invisibility. He picks up the telephone to call Admiral Donit's office, then sets it down again. What would he say? That he suspects the Allies have some kind of advanced radar but has no proof. That he thinks Enigma might be compromised even though German cryptographers swear it's unbreakable. They'd call him defeatist. Paranoid. They might relieve him of command. So instead, Luth does what officers do when they know the truth but can't speak it. He writes another order sending another submarine to sea. He updates the patrol charts. He maintains the routines and procedures of an institution that doesn't know it's already dead. And he waits for the pins to multiply. Back aboard USS Chatelain, Lieutenant David climbs out of U-505's forward torpedo room carrying an armful of technical manuals. He's covered in oil and seawater, grinning like a man who's just won the lottery. Behind him, American technicians are cataloging everything. The Enigma machine has already been carefully removed, wrapped in oilcloth, and placed in a waterproof crate. The acoustic torpedo, the German secret weapon that homes in on propeller noise, is being photographed from every angle. Code books are being copied. Charts traced. Equipment inventoried. Commander Gallery stands on Chatelain's bridge, watching his crew rig tow cables to the captured submarine. The sun is setting now, painting the Atlantic in shades of copper and blood. U-505 wallows in the swell, half flooded, dying slowly, but still afloat. Still salvageable. Gallery's executive officer climbs up to the bridge. "Sir, the pumps are holding. We've got the flooding under control. She'll make it to Bermuda if the weather holds." Gallery nods. He's not thinking about the submarine anymore. He's thinking about the look on that German captain's face when Trocino explained the radar. The absolute devastation in those eyes. It's one thing to lose a battle. Everyone loses battles. But to discover you've been fighting blind while your enemy could see. That you've been sending men to their deaths based on tactics that stopped working a year ago. That's something different. Gallery's father fought in the last war. Told him once that the worst thing about combat wasn't the violence or the fear, it was the helplessness. The feeling that no matter how brave or skilled or determined you were, the outcome had already been decided by forces you couldn't control. That's what he saw in Lange's face. Helplessness. Sir. The executive officer is still waiting. Should we signal Pearl Harbor? Let them know we've got the boat. Not yet. Gallery looks at the setting sun. Radio silence until we're in port. I don't want German intelligence picking up any transmissions that might tell them we captured one of their boats intact. You think they'd try to sink it? Their own submarine. Gallery almost laughs. I think they'd send every U-boat in the Atlantic to put a torpedo in her if they knew what we had. Better to destroy the evidence than let us learn their secrets. But it's too late for that. The secrets are already being catalogued, photographed, studied. By this time tomorrow, every technical detail of U-505 will be on its way to Washington. Within a week, American anti-submarine tactics will be updated based on what they find. Within a month, the few remaining U-boats still at sea will be fighting against an enemy that knows every weakness, every system limitation, every design flaw. And they'll never know why the losses keep mounting. Down in Chatelain's holding area, Fisher sits with 19 other enlisted men, all of them silent. Nobody knows what to say. They're alive, which seems impossible given how the day started. They're prisoners, which seems shameful. They're eating American rations, white bread, canned beef, chocolate, which seems obscene. Weber, the radioman, speaks first. They knew where we were. Everyone turns to look at him. In the fog. They knew exactly where we were. I've been thinking about it. About how fast they arrived. About how accurate those depth charges were. He looks around at faces still smudged with oil and smoke. They could see us. That's impossible, Fisher says, but there's no conviction in it. Is it? Weber's voice rises. Is it impossible? Or have we just been told it's impossible by people who don't know any better? The silence that follows is heavy enough to crush steel. Finally, an older mechanic, a veteran of 30 patrols, speaks up. My brother served on U-223. Lost with all hands in March. Last transmission said they were surfacing in a storm to charge batteries. Weather too bad for aircraft. Too rough for surface ships to operate. He looks at Weber. But something found them anyway. Around the room, men are starting to connect pieces. Starting to remember boats that vanished without explanation. Patrols where Allied ships appeared at exactly the wrong moment. Radio intercepts that seemed too accurate to be luck. How long? Fisher asks quietly. How long have they been able to see us? Nobody answers. Because the answer is too terrible to speak aloud. Long enough that thousands of men are already dead. Long enough that the war they thought they were fighting ended months or years ago, and nobody told them. In the officer's compartment, Lange hears his crew starting to understand. He hears the rising voices, the questions, the anger. He wants to go to them. To explain. To somehow make it less awful. But there's nothing he can say that will make it less awful. But there's nothing he can say that will make it less awful. So he sits in silence and listens to his men learn the same truth he learned. That they'd been ghosts haunting an ocean that could see ghosts. That their courage meant nothing against an enemy who'd changed the rules without telling them. That invisibility was an illusion. And fog was never on their side at all. U-505 arrives in Bermuda on June 19, 1944, 15 days after her capture. She's towed into the harbor at night, under strict radio blackout, flanked by destroyers with orders to sink her if any unidentified vessel approaches. The few sailors who see her passage are sworn to secrecy. The dock workers who help secure her moorings are told she's a captured Italian boat, damaged and being scrapped. The lie spreads easily. Nobody questions it. By the time Lange and his crew reach the POW camp in Ruston, Louisiana, 3 weeks later, the official story is set in stone, U-505 was sunk with all hands. The Kriegsmarine adds another pin to the map. Another 50 names to the list of missing. Another submarine that simply vanished into the Atlantic with no survivors, no wreckage, no explanation. Germany never learns the truth. Not during the war. Not at surrender. For 2 years, U-505 is the most closely guarded secret in the American naval arsenal, more classified than the Manhattan Project, more restricted than ultra-decryption. The intelligence haul from that single submarine reshapes Allied anti-submarine warfare so completely that German commanders notice the change but can't explain it. In August 1944, Admiral Donitz orders a full review of U-boat tactics after losing 37 boats in a single month. The review finds nothing wrong with German procedures. The conclusion, written in a classified report, states, enemy detection capabilities have improved beyond our understanding. Recommend increased caution until technical analysis can be completed. The technical analysis never comes. There's no equipment to study. No captured radar to reverse engineer. Just an increasing certainty among veteran commanders that something fundamental has changed, combined with the inability to prove it or stop it. By the time the war ends in May 1945, 783 German U-boats have been lost. 30,000 submariners have died, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in any nation during the entire war. How many of them died believing fog would protect them? How many surfaced at night thinking darkness made them invisible? How many sent their final radio transmissions never knowing those transmissions helped the Allies find them? There's no way to calculate that number. But Lange thinks about it every day in the POW camp. He thinks about the commanders he knew, the men he served with, the crews who sailed out after him and never came back. He thinks about all the submarines still at sea in June 1944, still hunting, still diving, still surfacing in fog banks and thinking they were safe. All of them visible on radar screens they didn't know existed. One afternoon in October 1944, Lange is working in the camp garden. Prisoners are required to do agricultural labor for 50 cents a day, when an American guard approaches with a newspaper. The guard's English is slow and careful, like he's practiced this conversation. Your boat, the guard says. U-505. It says here she's been raised from the ocean. That we captured her intact. Lange takes the newspaper. The article is brief, buried on page 6. The Navy has announced the capture of a German submarine earlier this year, now being studied for technical intelligence. No names. No details. Just confirmation that what everyone assumed was sunk had actually been taken. Did you know? The guard asks. When you surrendered. Did you know what you were giving us? Lange thinks about the Enigma machine. The code books. The acoustic torpedoes. The patrol charts showing every U-boat operating area in the Atlantic. He thinks about American intelligence officers photographing everything, studying everything, learning everything. Yes, he says quietly. We knew. The guard nods and walks away. Lange stands in the garden, holding the newspaper, and allows himself a moment of bitter satisfaction. At least now Germany knows. At least now the commanders still sending boats to sea understand that the old tactics don't work anymore. Except Germany doesn't know. Not really. The announcement says a U-boat was captured. It doesn't say when. It doesn't say which boat. It doesn't say the capture happened in June, which means every tactical change the Allies made afterward was based on German secrets. The Kriegsmarine will study the announcement and conclude the capture must have been recent, October perhaps, or September. They'll never realize that for 4 months, every U-boat that put to sea was fighting an enemy who'd already read their playbook. By the time the truth comes out, there won't be anyone left to tell. The war ends. Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945. In ports from Norway to France, U-boat commanders receive orders to surface, raise black flags, and sail to designated surrender points. Some comply. Some scuttle their boats rather than hand them over. A few simply disappear, sailing to South America or Argentina, choosing exile over defeat. Lange is repatriated to Germany in January 1946. He arrives to find Hamburg in ruins, his family scattered, his nation occupied by foreign armies. The Kriegsmarine no longer exists. Most of his fellow U-boat commanders are dead, imprisoned, or facing war crimes tribunals. He never serves at sea again. In 1954, U-505 is donated to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. She's towed up the St. Lawrence Seaway, dragged across roads on custom-built transporters, and installed as a permanent exhibit. Thousands of tourists walk through her cramped corridors every year, marveling at the tiny bunks and cramped machinery, taking photos next to the torpedo tubes. Very few of them know the real story. The museum placard mentions she was captured in 1944. It mentions Lieutenant David's bravery boarding a submarine that might explode at any moment. It mentions that U-505 was the only German submarine captured on the high seas during the entire war. It doesn't mention the radar. It doesn't mention that German submariners spent years surfacing in fog, believing in an invisibility that never existed. It doesn't mention the 30,000 men who died fighting a war the Allies had already won through technology they didn't know about. It doesn't mention that U-505's capture was kept secret so long that her sister submarines kept using the same tactics, the same codes, the same radio frequencies, all the way to the end. Lange visits the museum once, in 1960. He's 63 years old, living in Bremen, working as a clerk in a shipping office. A friend who emigrated to America sends him a letter saying his old boat is on display in Chicago, perfectly preserved, painted in museum gray. He doesn't tell anyone he's coming. He buys a plane ticket, flies to Chicago, and walks through the exhibit alone on a Wednesday afternoon when the crowds are thin. The submarine looks smaller than he remembers. Cleaner. The paint is fresh, the brass polished, the equipment restored to museum-quality perfection. It looks like a movie set, not a weapon. Not a coffin. He stands in the control room where he gave the order to surface. Where Hauser called out depths as depth charges exploded. Where red emergency lights painted everything in blood. Now it's lit with gentle museum lighting, and there are safety rails to keep tourists from touching the equipment. A young boy, maybe 12 years old, runs up to the periscope and pretends to look through it. His father takes a photo. They're smiling. Having fun. Lange wants to tell them what happened in this room. Wants to explain that this submarine didn't die in battle or go down fighting. She was captured because her crew was exhausted and overwhelmed and didn't know the war had already changed. He wants to tell them about the rectangular antenna on USS Chatelain's mast, rotating in the fog, seeing everything. But he doesn't say anything. He just stands there for a long time, listening to tourists laugh and children play, and then he leaves. Outside, Chicago is bright and loud and alive with the kind of careless prosperity that only nations who won wars can afford. The museum sits on Lake Michigan's shore, and Lange can see sailboats in the distance, moving freely across water that nobody's hunting in anymore. He thinks about Fisher and Weber and all the men who survived. Most of them are scattered across Germany now, living quiet lives, working ordinary jobs, trying to forget. He thinks about the ones who didn't survive. The 17 men who went down with U-505's engine room. The thousands who went down with other boats, still believing fog made them invisible. And he thinks about the moment when Trocino told him the truth, and the entire war suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. They could see us, and we couldn't see them. That was all it took. That was the whole difference. Not courage. Not skill. Not determination. Just one side having technology the other side didn't know existed. Lange walks away from the museum and doesn't look back. He flies home to Bremen the next day and never speaks about U-505 again. When he dies in 1968, his obituary mentions he served in the Kriegsmarine during the war. It doesn't mention which boat. It doesn't mention the capture. It doesn't mention that for a brief moment in 1944, he'd been invisible in the fog. And then suddenly, terribly, he wasn't.